Chapter 13. It reminded her of the first time she had seen a penis. That was Eva's overriding thought as she sat hunched in front of the laptop screen, hands rammed into the side of her face, trying to block out Tariq, Luan and her other cousins and their incessant laughing jabber as they cut drugs, drank beer and whiskey and played poker. Shrugging off their invitations to join them with stiff-shouldered irritation, Eva kept her face pressed as close as possible to the buzzing computer screen, re-watching the 2-minute video clip of a young insurgent's blood-splattered splaying. Barely 20, the young man blinked at the camera pointed towards him, his hands tied behind his back and a numb look of disbelief on his face. The big man next to him caught him by the shoulder with one hand and with the other executed a swift backhand stroke with an insanely large, rusting machete. The beheaded rebel performed a crazy and somewhat comical little dance before falling down next to his head and twitching grotesquely. As with the first time she'd ever come face to face with a man's private regions, her initial viewing left her pale and weakened, a being with no center. But such feebleness is easily overcome. At age 14, the pulsating thing with the head of purple thrust her way was that of her cousin Rakin. He roughly grabbed a handful of hair and demanded she lick it as the two engaged in a vehement battle of reluctance and want. A battle that she, the 14-year-old girl, would win. Not by disobeying, but by obliging. Not by licking, but by biting. Her teeth had sunk easily into that strange, raw sausage. The veiny roll of muscly flesh had squelched satisfactorily between her clamped teeth. In later, stronger years, she'd regretted not biting all the way through, lifting her head with the thing torn off in her mouth like an animal. Blood streaming down her jowls, showing it defiantly to her grease-smeared, sweat-stinking cousin while he howled and screamed for his dark time. After that, they'd become something of an interest, a preoccupation. She overcame their ugly curiosity by studying them incessantly, first in pictures, then in flesh. Many a boy of the Veli-Podja neighbourhood succumbed to her sultry demands and let their pants drop to the dusty ground of back alleys, waiting with toothy acne-crusted smiles for what was coming next. Few expected the quizzical examinations Eva would deliver, not touching, just looking. The occasional prod with the tip of her index finger like a nurse performing a prostate exam. On one occasion, when an 18-year-old, back from a 4-week stint working as a lackey, fishing for red porgy and scombus gombrus on the far reaches of the Adriatic, with no one for company but 6 burly middle-aged men, expected more than mere scrutiny, things had taken an ugly turn. He'd pushed her up against a wall, shaving skin from her shoulders in great chunks, and rammed his hand up her skirt, breathing hard into his face as he stole for her insides. What many would have thought of as rape, Eva channeled into experience. It was another great lesson in the understanding of the slutty art form she would come to make her own. She endured it, stiff and silent, as he pounded away, wondering if this was all there was to it. From there, her studies progressed to pornography, a multitude of magazines, films where possible, hungrily learning more and more about what men liked and what women performed, the crazy dance in all its sticky glory. By the first time a man had ignited her, it was she who was the master manipulator. Little more than a stolen virgin, the girl of 17 grabbed the hair of the 25-year-old, pulling him towards her as she knelt upright on the edge of his bed, giving him only seconds to tear open her shirt and kiss and suck at those magnificent breasts, bend down to her crotch and breathe in her scent. She soon threw him onto the bed like a wrestler, climbing on board him like he were nothing but a thing she now owned and forcing his head violently back, tasting the exposed bulge of his neck. By the time she moved down to put into practice all she had been learning these past few years, scratching her nails up the insides of his thighs hard enough to leave thin traces of blood and opening her mouth to inaugurate her art, the man was already jerking and spasming into a thunderous climax. She leant back from him on the bed, wiping her mouth on the back of her hand and eyeing him coldly. He recovered, shaking his head in self-satisfied disbelief and reaching for her, a gauche smile on his face. She bent down to him. He closed his eyes, expecting a kiss. Instead, she spat hatefully onto his eyelids, sprang from the bed like a cat, snatched up her discarded clothing and ran from the room to his groans of repulsed frustration. And so it was with the internet's clips of savage barbarity. At first, she'd stolen quick glances, then longer looks through the orange glowing gaps in her latticed fingers. Pictures of disembodied heads lined up on the sides of dusty roads for maximum propaganda. Videos now. Mass shootings, men bound and knelt at the side of pits, waiting calmly as the row of the living became the tumble of the dead, cascading down into an earthly cavern to join a mass jumble of cadavers. Children, as young as 2, dead in their father's arms. A woman in her 20s, naked and silky smooth, trussed like a turkey and hoisted into the air over a large, dank barrel, her throat sliced open into an ugly gash, her blood spilling furiously into the barrel's depths with the force of a suddenly burst pipe. It became easier and easier the more she went on. Tolerance increased and became irrelevance. This too could be overcome and mastered. She sat squat across the chair, feasting on the images like a man watching a boxing match. She could become the fine artist, the master manipulator of this crazy dance too. She smiled. It was only the cold drop of water, filtered through the ceiling from the floor above, splashing onto her face, that stole Eva back from her schemes. She touched her nose, examining her fingertips, finding them wet, and looked up to see the greying plaster spreading with an upside-down puddle that seemed to defy gravity. She'd heard Tintin come rattling in 10 minutes earlier, his small feet pounding up the stairs in furious stomps. She'd heard the bath being filled at full pelt, but lost interest at that point, her engrossment in a new dark world leaving little room for thought of anything else. Reluctantly, she set the buzzing laptop to sleep and followed Tintin's path up the rickety stairs. She pushed the bathroom door lightly with her fingertips and let it come quietly open a few inches, peering inside. Tintin was in the bath, full to the brim, the tap still gushing water into it. Great sheaves of it tipping over the rim like wads of material and adding to the growing pool on the floor. Eva shut the bathroom door behind her, stepped over the pool, turned off the effusive tap and sat on the toilet, crossing her strong legs and looking at Tintin, pointing a swaying, stilettoed heel his way. He had Luan's straight razor in his hand and had been hacking at his greasy long hair, trying and failing to emulate the closely shaved heads of the men of the community, those men who, like warriors, took no shit from anyone. Instead of a successful emulation, Tintin had sliced into his scalp in a mismatch of unsightly gashes and left his hair hacked and ruined like a fire-ravaged crop of corn. Blood ran down his neck and slid into the bathwater at the same rate tears ran from his angry eyes and slid down his flushed cheeks. Eva sighed knowingly. She picked up the pig mask from within his crumpled clothing on the floor beside the bath, pulled it on and snorted whimsically for Tintin's amusement. For a moment it worked. Tintin's haunted, deeply cut sorrow lifted and his face broke into a chuckling grin. But this would not last, and the grin gave way to a collapse of tears that betrayed the young boy's wounded pride. She pulled off the mask and, to his surprise, followed this by pulling off her shirt and the remainder of her clothing, underwear included, and slipping into the bath in front of him. Tintin trembled slightly, as any boy, however proud, however broken, would the first time he experienced a woman naked and near to him, especially a woman such as this. Eva took the razor from his quivering fingers and examined the tattered remnants of his hair like a stylist being asked to fix an at-home perm that had gone horribly wrong. With great tenderness, Eva skated the razor over the remainder of the stubborn clumps of thick black hair, left like desert Mormon tea bushes on the round of Tintin's scalp. The final tufts twirling down like leaves in the wind and landing on the bathwater's surface to float like feathers. When finished, she turned Luan's shaving mirror towards the boy to feast on his own reflection. Tintin took in a gleeful gasp like a child at Christmas laying eyes on the bicycle his parents had told him he couldn't have in the sweetest of deceptions. Tintin smiled his thanks to Eva and his eyes glassed over with fresh tears. She took his face in her hands with an uncommon gentleness and laid him against her bare breast, resting her cheek on the top of his head and swaying slightly. They remained like that a long time, the childless mother and the motherless child, wrapped up in a unison of slippery, wet skin and dark promises. Outside, a dog howled at the moon and the night gave way to a grimly air, thick with smoke and grit from the shantytown surrounding the turkey cage and flies from the marshes. When the wind spoke, its voice was brittle, full of filth. Soon, it said.